All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Wow, after last week, we got 2 people on the sign-up sheet. That's all right. Woo, yeah, good deal. All right, so welcome, everybody. Yes. So, we're going to start by calling a meeting to order. Today's a study session, and we'll start with the roll call and the pledge.
Mayor Bagley.
I am here.
Council members Christensen, Finley, Martin, Peck, Rodriguez, Waters. Mayor, you have a quorum.
All right, and Marcia was called beforehand and said she'll be a little late, so we'll wait for her. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, let's go ahead and start with the first one. There's only 2 here, but I was actually going to say, I don't know about you guys. It feels really dark lately. I don't know what it is, but everybody I know, clients, friends, family, it's like, I don't know if it's the national, everything's just like bickering and ugly. So if you could, I'm not going to start your timer, just say something positive before you speak. Just say anything positive about anything you want. Wife, kids, just briefly just say something. All right, so let's go ahead and start with Colleen Fitzgerald. I have nothing good to say. I hate you guys. And I will not start your 3 minutes. If you want to say something positive, just great. If not, just launch right into it.
If there's only two of us, do I get about a half hour then?
You can have, if it's really positive.
Okay. I love Longmont. No, I've been here. My name's Colleen Fitzgerald, and I've been here living in Longmont about 12 years, and I absolutely do love it. So there you go.
That's very
Thank you.
positive.
I hope you have received the correspondence from Susan Springer, Mary Headley, Bill Hayes, and myself. We represent a committee of residents living in the Midtown neighborhood as defined in the one plan, and the C2 gap area in the Parks Trails Master Plan, approximately Main and 15th Street going west. The letter given to you refers to a wonderful opportunity that is before you. Our neighborhood, also called, as I mentioned, the C2 gap area in the Parks, Recreation, and Trails Master Plan, exposes a deficiency of a neighborhood park. I'm not sure why the plan easily dismisses the thought that a park is possible in this neighborhood, but it does. The plan identifies standards for a neighborhood park being located within a half mile of a resident's home or a maximum of a 10-minute walk, and these are also national standards. A quote from the master plan states, "Longmont's well-designed and maintained system of parks, recreation facilities, and trails are an integral part of the community. They are relevant to the times, tailored to meet the neighborhood, family, and individual needs, accessible and support a healthy, engaged, and economically vibrant Longmont." Although the plan does not prioritize our area for a neighborhood park, we're unsure why, and it is evident and obvious that one is necessary. The city rezoned several properties along the 15th and Main Street corridor, and it has the potential to rezone other properties in that corridor. And it would allow for over 500 plus apartments to be built. This is within a 6-block radius. This infill for an established neighborhood such as ours is astounding to many of us, but we also understand, and the city has made it clear, that this housing is very necessary. It's my understanding that the Cavalier family is exploring the opportunity of working with the city to develop their property for a neighborhood park. What a wonderful opportunity this city has in front of itself to take a gap area identified and be able to fulfill a need of a neighborhood park, as well as respecting as well as utilizing the property of a very well-respected family. Please don't impose high-density infill without addressing the need of our community. Our neighborhood still remains affordable to young families, and parks are a vital component to a healthy community. We encourage council and the Parks and Recreation Advisory to consider this issue and support our request.
All right, thank you. I gave you an extra 7 seconds because you said something positive.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Strider Benston.
It's a back thing and a knee thing and other things, but that's not the positive thing. The positive thing, last week there were close to 200 people here. About half of them chose to speak. And in almost every case, it was very civil. And people on both sides, or the 5 different sides that were speaking on different issues, were very respectful. And I don't know if anybody's learned something or if it just incidental, but 6 months ago it was not that good. And I really appreciate everybody actually who participated last week, even in very contentious issues. You want to hit the clock? Last week, I closed by indicating a person kind of designated by the person who calls himself president about all of these evil brown skinned people trying to sneak into the country from the Bahamas. And I mentioned one illegal Bahamian immigrant whom you probably have heard of, Sidney Poitier. Cool thing, I went to the pump house and had one or so, and then went home and watched news for a while, and I was about to go to bed, 1 o'clock in the morning, and hit the movie channel, TCM, and boom, Lilies of the Field. The first time I've ever seen the whole movie, Sidney Poitier's first Academy Award. And it's like, hey, I put it up in the universe and he came back. That was so cool. Actually, he's playing right now, To Serve with Love. So anyway, coming out tomorrow, Naomi Klein has a new book, On Fire, about the planet. Her first book was Incredible Shock Doctrine that explained to us how we, the whole game of destroying the world back in the 90s, and here it is going again, infinitely worse. But we have to keep on target, and I mentioned Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old girl who sailed over here from Sweden and is speaking around about how do we save the planet so that she can grow up and have children. And one thing, right here in Longmont, we're having the climate walkout, 2 demonstrations here in Longmont, 6th and Main on Friday, 9 o'clock in the morning and 4:30 in the afternoon. There'll be a big one in Denver and all over the world. We are trying to save the planet, although our executariat in this country is actively working to destroy it. Greta yesterday spoke at was given an award. He says the pace of awakening is shifting. Activism works. Dare to act, because no one is too small to make a difference. She said, see you on the streets. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, that will conclude our first call public, actually our only call public invited to be heard. So let's go ahead and move on to, and believe it or not, Councilmember Martin is in the queue. But she's not here yet. Yeah, I know, but anyway, I thought it was kind of funny. Yes. Well, we miss her. I hope, Marcia, you will hurry. All right, so let's move on to any special reports or presentations? Harold? No? Okay. Then let's go ahead and move on to, are there any motions to direct the city manager to add agenda items? All right, perfect. Let's go on to study session item 5A, the 2020 budget presentation, and this is carried over from the September 10th, 2019 regular session because we just didn't have time. So, Mr. Golden, all yours.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley, members of council. I'm Jim Golden, the Chief Financial Officer. Last week I felt a lot better, so excuse my voice this week. I'm gonna probably go a little slower so that I don't lose it while I'm presenting here tonight. But we've never had a budget presentation delayed by council inviting 80 of their friends to not have us present. So we're going to rebound from that experience here. Today we're going to start with a summary of the 2020 proposed budget, and then we'll go into the general fund summary and the public safety fund summary. Packet from last week had some attachments related to this, beginning with attachment F and G on pages S25 and S26. And that's taking a look at the overall proposed budget for 2020. It's $10 million less than the adopted budget for 2019, which is 2.75% less than 19's overall budget. There's 43 individual funds. If you look at either F or G, what that's doing is showing you the changes in each of those 43 funds. If you're wanting to see where the significant increases by fund are, you can look on either one of them. You could also see how much is being drawn down from fund balance in any of the funds in attachment F. And then on attachment G, it breaks out the expenses between operating expenses and CIP expenses. So that you can have an idea of where the big differences are from 19 to 20 in our CIP program. So there was a significant drop in the CIP projects from 87.9 million to 52.4 million. And really, although there's a number of funds that have some shifts upwards or downwards, the biggest change is the fact that we had $41.2 million budgeted in 2019 for the Windy Gap firming project from mostly the water fund, but 3 different water type funds. So that's really responsible for much of our decrease. So I'm not going to take you through any of the other major changes. We did highlight those for you in the communication of which of the funds had significant increases or decreases, and also which of the funds had significant increase or decrease in CIP project costs. So I'm going to move into revenue projections. And this information is updated through our latest sales tax report, which was for the month of July, which was revenue received in August. So you can see here that through July, we have now got an increase in sales and use tax overall of 3.1%. When we first sit down to do our revenue projections, it's a couple of months prior to this. And so at that point in time, our increase year-to-date through May was 0.1%. So that's what we were looking at when we were trying to project what we might see in our sales and use tax for the rest of this year as well as for next year. So take that into consideration. We did make an adjustment after the June report, which took it up to 1.5% growth. Our projections to end 2019 they're still, I think, valid projections. Our sales taxes, we projected at about 3.1%, which is close to where we're at today. Our use tax, we're projecting it'll drop about 8%. And you know that use tax can experience some large swings. We know for a fact that looking at the amount of lumber use tax we received in 2018 from the building permits in the second half of the year, it's going to be very hard to match that this year. I can tell you already we didn't match it in August we only about a third of what it was the year before, and halfway through September, we are again probably not close to matching what September of 2018 achieved in lumber use tax. So I do believe we will continue to see some decrease in that source of use tax, and that's part of really why we have a projection overall of an 8% drop in use tax for the year. So then we took that 1% overall growth in sales and use tax that we projected in 19 to end at, and on top of that, we built projections for 2020. Our 2020 projections are just based on taking a CPI growth indicator as well as a population growth indicator. And considering the fact that some of those overlap, we didn't just add those together. And so overall, we were looking in general at about a 3% type of increase in revenue from most areas of sales tax. And then where we knew of some differences that exist from new businesses and such, we would work that as well into our projections. So combined, we have a 3.46% increase in sales and use tax built into this proposed budget for 2020, over a 1% growth for this year. Our building permit estimates for 2020, they're slightly below what was used for the 2019 budget. Those are actually all included within your communication. This slide just shows what 2020's projections are, with a total of 320 single dwelling units and 600 multifamily for a combined number of 920 versus the projections for this year's budget were based on 995 combined. That's just part of what drives the building permit revenue projections, because there's obviously a lot more than just increases in single-family dwellings. We also have to have a commercial estimate that Development Services put together for us, and we do also make assumptions on remodels and such. But this is a number that also drives not just building permit projections, but also our community investment fee projections for a lot of the individual funds in the city. So property tax. So as you know, the property tax calendar calls for a reassessment every other year. This budget is one of those years where we are going through a reassessment. And when there's a non-reassessment year, we do not have much of a jump in property tax revenue. All that we get is the new construction that is being tracked by the county. But in a year like this one, we are experiencing not just new construction, but also increase in value as well. The constitutional provisions of the Gallagher Amendment did change. We talked about that last year in anticipation that that might be a significant drop. Turned out that it was not as significant a drop as we were looking for to anticipate. It dropped from a residential assessment ratio of 7.2% to 7.15% beginning in 2019. And that's as compared to the commercial ratio of 29%. So in July, we are in contact with the county, both counties actually, and we received some information from them on what we might anticipate for growth in property tax. They do not have to give us an actual preliminary assessed valuation until late August, which doesn't really help us in putting together our budget from year to year. So that's why we do make contact with them and get a general idea of what growth to anticipate, realizing that there's going to be some reductions in that growth from appeals that are ongoing. So what we used for the budget for 2020, the proposed budget for 2020, was an increase of $1,750,000 in property tax revenues. That's a 9.2% increase over the amount that we had budgeted for 2019. So what we did also in building this budget, we proposed that of that $1.75 million, that we would take $220,000 of it and use that for one-time expenses instead of ongoing expenses. We did this because we're trying to look ahead to 2021. Again, talking about the calendar and how the assessment calendar and how the off years don't show as much growth in property tax. It becomes a very hard year for us to budget when we don't have much property tax growth, depending only on sales and use tax growth. So we held back $220,000 and budgeted here in the proposed budget to use that instead just for one-time expenses in 2020, so that it would then be available for ongoing use in the 2021 budget. So we did receive the preliminary assessed valuations in late August, and this is the point where we're just putting this document together for you at that point, and we don't even try to get it into that at that point in time because of the lateness of it. The valuations then reflected instead a 13.98% overall increase in property tax revenue for 2020. The total increase there is $2,665,887. The Boulder County assessed valuation increased 13%, while the Weld County assessed valuation increased 150%. So new construction is responsible for 15.5% of the growth in Boulder County's AV, but for Weld County, 79.3% of the growth in Weld County's AV is from new growth. So overall, Weld County, they only make up 2.6% of our overall city assessed valuation. So after we get those preliminary assessed valuations in August, we do not receive a final valuation until, I'll jump to that in a second. We don't receive a final certification until late November. And so at that point is when we actually find out what they'll be billing and how much revenue we will receive. So in our process, we always do try to allow for that number to go down between August and November, because we have experienced that in the past. And so we have proposed to not budget $250,000 of the amount that we received in August, that final amount received in August, just to avoid having to potentially come back and cut the budget. So we're trying to not over budget the property tax. So what that does is gives us $665,887 of property tax revenue that is still, could still be budgeted in this proposed budget. As with the $220,000 that I mentioned that we budgeted for one-time expenses, we would suggest that this amount also be utilized on a one-time expense or multiple one-time expenses, so that we can allow for new ongoing property tax revenue in our 2021 budgeting process. Potential uses for that we've identified could include either increasing the funding towards the First and Main Transit Area CIP project or the Railroad Quiet Zone CIP project. The other thing I wanted to point out about, but not only are we looking out for the fact that 2021 is not a reassessment year, but we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we may be looking at a recession. And if that happens, our sales and use tax can take a hit. It did in the past when the recession hits, and we had 2 years of negative growth in sales and use tax when the last major recession hit. So again, the reason for us backing off on the use of that property tax is to really set ourselves up for maybe a little bit of a cushion for building that budget for 2021. And this is what I was just talking about as far as the options. And besides those two options that I mentioned, like I said, you could use a combination of both projects, or the other option, of course, is always to add to the emergency reserves. I'll be talking to you about the emergency reserves here in a few minutes to give you an idea of what we'll be looking at with the budget as currently proposed. So I'm going to move now into the general fund budget summary. And we did provide some detail for you in your communication on page S20. As we bulleted a lot of the growth in the general fund revenues and such. I'm not going to take you through each of those. I'm just going to take you through some major changes. So I'll start with this slide, and we're pointing out overall the budget for 19's adopted budget was $82.6 million almost. This budget is almost $86.8 million. This is for the general fund, a 5.1% increase, $4.2 million greater than 2019. So what we're going to do here real quickly is kind of analyze those differences. From a revenue perspective, the difference is made up of $5.1 million of increased revenues and $938,000 of decreased revenues. You got attachment H in your communication on page S27, and it gives you all of the detail, each of those levels of dollars amounts of revenues that go up or down. I'm not going to cover all of them, but the major ones that increased our plan check fees, that decreased our plan check fees, going down $378,000. And the reason why they're going down $378,000 is we goofed, we overestimated for 2019. We're not reaching this level, and so we needed to adjust what we were anticipating for plan check fees for 2020 as well. Intergovernmental revenue dropping by $137,000. I believe that's mostly flood recovery money. And then we talked previously about the AMR contract and no longer receiving revenue from them, so that's $220,000. The major increases are the property tax that I referred to already, 1.73 million for ongoing resources. Sales and use tax increase is 1.65 million. Administrative transfer fees of 370,000. Oil and gas royalties for 330,000, and those monies actually being just set aside for oil and gas purposes as well. So it's not actually giving us new money for any other ongoing sources of expenses. Utility franchise revenues of almost $290,000. Court fines and fees of $187,000. We've had some decreases in recent years. The judge has really made some increases in the amount of fines, I believe, that have been levied, that not on the books in the sense of raising any fines that from a legal perspective, but he's got a range that he can apply, and so he's been applying it at a higher amount, and that has worked along with some increased numbers as well. So. And then we have credit card convenience fees that we're proposing to put in place in 2020 of $150,000. And then the state marijuana tax of $145,000. So we get a share back from the state of marijuana revenue. From their 15% tax, we get 1.5% back from the state. And that is currently in the general fund at $145,000 is what we are projecting it at for 2020. So from an expense perspective, again, the same change from 82.6 to 86.8, but that's broken down into $4.6 million of increased expenses and $407,000 of reduced expenses. The major increases we've talked about in the past budget processes that we classify our budget requests for O&M type resources as ongoing, either level 1, which is to maintain existing level of resources. These are expenses that we're going to incur whether or not we provide budget funding for them. There are increases in contracts, minimum wage, overtime that we're already been spending, and that's $469,000. And then ongoing level 2 that we're funding at $604,000, and level 2 is just enhanced expenses to, in a sense, to increase services, existing services though. So the level 1 requests we probably receive twice as much as what you see here, and our budget staff does review those carefully, and where we think and work with the divisions where we think they can actually still absorb them into their existing budget, or where we think they're really not even level 1 type expenses, we'll move them into level 2. So that is resulted in probably about half of those level 1 expenses moving on into level 2 or going away altogether. We have over $2 million of pay and related benefits in the general fund. And then we have 8 3/4 new FTE in the general fund. And on top of that, we have human service agency funding increasing by $283,000 almost. Moving into the FTE that we will be adding the 8.75 FTE. You did receive in your packet for this week information on all of the requests, level 2 type requests, including these FTE. So all of our budget enhancements of new monies. We did put together worksheets that we'll be reviewing with you in concept here in a few minutes for looking at measures for each of those new requests, metrics for them all, expectations of what we are hoping to achieve with these enhancements. And each one of these 8 3/4 FTE have one of those, or else one of these or more could be on one of these worksheets that you have in your packet tonight. So the 8 3/4 are 1 FTE attorney, 1 FTE library campus supervisor, and that's a position that we have funded this year and last with one-time money, and so we are moving it into an ongoing status. 3/4 FTE for an admin analyst in recreation, and this one is a temporary position that's being benefited. 1 FTE senior resource specialist. We have 1 FTE for a new environmental sustainability planner, / I should say sustainability planner. We have 2 FTE arborists. These are being converted from temp wages and seasonal funding into full-time positions. 1 FTE for an ERP business analyst, and 1 FTE for an accountant.
Hey, Jim, wasn't the recreation a conversion too?
Right, I did say that actually. Okay. It was, I think I said it, but it was a temp position being benefited is what it was. Yeah. Right. The 3/4 FTE, that one there. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the general fund reserves. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, this is the 2019 reserve policy targets. This is based on the general fund's ongoing expenses in the 2019 budget. Our TABOR reserve, this is a dollar amount that gets calculated underneath a formula spelled out in TABOR. So that's our first leg of our policy, and that reserve makes up 5.88% of the operating expenditures in the general fund, and it's $4.85 million. The emergency reserve is an 8% target. That's $6.6 million in the 2019 budget. And then we have a stabilization reserve target that's anywhere from 3 to 8%. So that's $2.4 million to $6.6 million. So our total overall reserve target is 16.9% to 21.9%. And that's a total of $13.9 million to $18.1 million. So through the 19 budget, our current funded reserves, we have the TABOR reserve fully funded as required. We have the full 8% emergency reserve funded at $6.6 million. And I think we finally just achieved that this past year. And then we've also finally achieved some funding in the stabilization reserve at 0.4% or $369,000. You might recall last year, if you do or don't, that we said we might be up as high as 1% maybe of that one stabilization reserve. It's a moving target. We never know for sure. As we sit here today, we don't know what that TABOR reserve is going to be in April of 2020 or 2019 when we did this a year ago. So when that changes, it takes away money that we would have put towards a stabilization reserve, assuming the TABOR reserve goes up, which it generally does. So that's why we only have 0.4% funded now. But our total funded reserves are 14.28% currently at $11.8 million. So based on this proposed budget, as currently proposed, and so I didn't even think about trying to revise this for the property tax I just told you about that would be going into here and increasing this. But as it was proposed, this TABOR reserve, it would be, again, same number because I don't know what that's going to be. It's just a lower percentage because we're using a higher budget amount. The emergency reserve is $6.9 million. Stabilization reserve anywhere from $2.6 to $6.9 million. And the overall reserve is $14.4 million to $18.7 million. Those would be the targets based on our current proposed budget. So what we're proposing to do as part of the original proposed budget was to increase our reserves by $1,667,300 What that would leave us looking like is what's on the bottom part of this slide. Again, we would have the first two fully funded, and it would take the stabilization reserve to 2% at $1.7 million and just below $13.5 million of total funded reserves. So we're continuing to move towards council's overall target there. All right, so I need to make sure I got my place here. So we want to talk a little bit about the general fund and the fund balance that we had, where it's coming from, and what we were able to do with it this year. We had a pretty significant fund balance available to us in the general fund. It's a outcome of a number of issues. The first of those is that our 2018 revenues exceeded budget by almost $3.3 million. Those revenues were mostly from sales and use tax and building permits. Our 2018 expenses were below budget by $3.4 million. And a lot of that's pretty significant savings, but last year you might recall that during the budget process we had to really begin to take some efforts. We had to cut some things from the 2019 general fund proposed budget in order to balance that budget. And since we were going through a tough budget process, we generally do begin to manage our budgets a lot tighter under a situation like that. And I think that certainly had an impact in our final performance of the carryover of expenditure dollars from the 2018 budget. We have $220,000 of property tax that I mentioned already for a one-time expense that I said we would recommending setting aside originally in the proposed budget. We have $436,000 of use tax that's set aside for one-time expense. We talked about this in the proposed 2019 budget, and this is the amount of use tax revenue that the general fund would receive based on our projections for building permits. And last year, we just felt that that number was growing too much year by year, and we thought we need to really begin to treat that number like it isn't an ongoing revenue source. And so we pinpointed a random number of a little over $5 million of use tax revenue, and so that's across all 5 funds. And so anything over that amount in our use tax projection from building permits, we thought we would consider for the general fund to be a one-time expense. So for this year's budget, that'd be $436,045. So those two amounts, the 220 and the 436, that gives us money available for one-time expenses in this budget process, and we did utilize those. And then finally, we have $755,120 of fund balance that we identified that we hadn't been identifying in the past. So when I go about trying to find how much fund balance are we did we end the year with, and do we have available to carry over into the next budget process? Simple accounting in a governmental fund, assets minus liabilities is your fund balance. And so we basically look at that fund balance, decide how much of that is set aside for whatever reserves and such that we have, and then whatever's left over is what we say we have available for one-time expenses in the next year's process. Never really took a really close look at those liabilities the last few years. And going through this process this year, it dawned on me that we have on our balance sheet of the general fund, $755,000 that represents an interfund loan that the general fund is paying back at the rate of $130,000 a year to the fleet fund for an economic development project for the South Main Station. That we initiated that loan about 3 years ago at like $1.1 million. And so that is correctly being accounted for on the balance sheet of the general fund. But in figuring out what was available for fund balance, I was overlooking the fact that that $130,000 is budgeted year after year. It's ongoing expense in our budget. And we're not using any money from the balance sheet of the general fund for that purpose. We're using future or existing revenues for that purpose. So in a sense, that really was available as part of the fund balance, and was not realizing that until just this past budget process. So we have $755,000 available for one-time use that we didn't realize that we had in the past. So what that's enabled us to do, we have one-time expenses in the general fund of $943,000. And I did probably forget to point out about the level 1, level 2 expenses. We do have an attachment in your packet tonight that details what all those level 1, level 2 expenses are. We have one page for each of those. We as well have one-time expenses that you'll hear about later tonight when Teresa's presenting in the packet for tonight's meeting, the 17th meeting. That covers this $943,000 of expenses there. And then we were able to put $2 million towards the First and Main Transit Station. This project, as you're aware, we talked about it earlier this year when we talked to council about budget in May. This was identified probably 2 years ago in the CIP process that it needed to be funded as we're moving forward. Obviously, we're going to hope to receive $17 million from RTD to add to this monies, but we have I think we now have an identified need of $5 million that the city needs to come forward with, and this is going to help us to be able to begin to purchase properties. We have funded $1.25 million through the 2019 budget. Most of that was the money from the sale of the cheese importers, but I think we added about $400,000 to that from the general fund last year. And so because of the fact that we mostly had this $775,000 and these other monies from the fund balance, we did identify $2 million that we would put towards it this year to try to move it along a lot further towards its full funding status. That would give us $3.25 million, which is still putting us $1.75 million below where it needs to be, I think within a couple of years, but it all depends on how everything moves there. And then finally, I talked about the emergency reserve, so part of the fund balance is being utilized for that as well. So I'm going to move from the general fund to the public safety fund and do a quick summary of that now. This is not that long, so we'll get through this quick. So the 2020 Public Safety Fund proposed budget, it's $13 million of sales and use tax and $1.2 million of grants and other intergovernmental revenues, plus $40,000 of revenue from firing range operations. The proposed budget for 2020 is $15.2 million. There's over 98 FTE now. It being funded out of the Public Safety Fund. Police, 53 FTE, and fire, 17 FTE, communications, 13, support services, 4, community health and resiliency, 8 FTE, and 1 in the city attorney's office, 2 in children and youth resources, and a portion in graffiti removal. This year's budget has $800 and almost $80,000 for one-time expenses in police and fire. The firing range operations expenses are $478,000, so that's offset by 20% of that being recovered in user fee revenues from either the public or from other governments. We have the final payment that is due on fire station number 1 of $350,000. So once that goes away, it frees up some more dollars within their pro forma for one-time expenses in the future. And then final payment for repayment on the loans to the Fleet Service Fund for the public safety radio replacements that we did two years ago or more. It's $77,000 for that purpose. The FTE, there's 18 new FTE that are proposed in the the fund for 2019. So they're all part of that 98 FTE that I referred to already. But the new FTE, which they do all, they also are addressed on those metric forms that are within your packet for the presentation that's coming up for the second part of this meeting. We have 4 FTE for police officers in patrol and 1 sergeant in patrol, 2 detective police officers, and 2 school resource officers. We have 3 firefighters and then 3 firefighter paramedics, 2 peer case managers in community health and resiliency, and 1 emergency management coordinator. So that is completion of what we were going to do last week. So we can stop here if you have questions.
Yeah, could we stop for a moment?
You bet.
So, Councilmember Peck?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. In looking at the FTEs, I remember that we asked for an FTE for the airport, and Harold did talk to me about that a little bit, but that how some of those duties would be farmed out to other people. I'm not exactly how that is, but why can't we get an FTE for the airport? And that's...
So generally, we have to, because that is an enterprise fund, we're working within the revenues that's coming into that location. What I'm trying to do is to evaluate some different options in order to provide assistance that would function as an FTE, but not necessarily hit his fund at the same level. But it's really because it is all in the airport fund.
So we are going to get some help for David.
I'm trying. You know, what I've realized over the last few weeks since Sean's been gone is I am spending an insane amount of time and learning more about David's operation in terms of the things that he's having to do. So that is something that we've got to figure out a way to
Okay.
get him some assistance.
Okay, and one more question. The Public Safety Fund FTEs, is that coming out of our bond that passed?
No,
for the
Mayor
public safety?
Mayor Bagley, members of council. That's the sales tax, the public safety sales
Okay.
tax.
Yeah.
There's, we wouldn't bond positions. The bond was for the facilities and infrastructure replacements.
Yeah, I said that wrong. I meant the tax that was on the ballot last time.
Right, so
Okay.
yes, it is coming from the tax.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then I also wanted to point out that I only was identifying new FTE in the general fund and the public safety fund. In a few minutes, Teresa will mention a couple of other FTE elsewhere in the budget that are also new that are included. So since you raised the airport issue, that reminded me that you'll hear a couple more anyway. So if there's no...
There are. Dr. Waters.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor Bagley. Just for the purposes of trying to make certain I'm tracking, the 8% decline in use tax, there's just so much construction going on. It's like, gosh, how do you account for that? You've got a theory, I'm sure.
Yes, Mayor Bagley, members of council. My theory is there was a lot more going on last year, so at least in the terms of the valuation of it. And so that we're really extremely high. I mean, it's like probably going to be our second highest year ever, maybe, or something. But it is coming in less than a year that was just
Right.
a higher point.
So last year was an anomaly, or
Yeah,
was exceptional.
Yeah, right, correct.
Can I keep going for just a couple more? The
No. Just kidding. Go ahead.
yeah, I know you are. 'Cause you know I'm going to keep going. Let me see. We don't have slide numbers. So of the 665,000 of property tax that you're going to budget as one time, you mentioned a couple possibilities: putting in reserves, quiet zones. So is that 665,000 that is yet to be allocated or budgeted?
Correct.
It's sitting over here to be TBD or TBD. All right. So we're gonna see the wildlife management plan next week, and I know one of the recommendations is to do more with citizen science. But that, if we're going to build a list of possibilities, that would be an example potentially of something that would be supported with that kind of funding.
Yeah, if I could jump in real quick to
Yeah.
add to that, you'll also see as we move through it, there's a component of Jim will talk about in the later presentation, the component of the marijuana tax that's also available for that. What I want to really underscore in this conversation is there is some angst about what's going to happen next year.
I'm sure.
And
yeah.
and the potential for a recession. And so if those are one-time costs, I think that's easier for us to manage, because what we found, if you remember last year's budget, we were trying to make a move to 102 and all of these other components. And just in that year, when it wasn't a reappraisal year, we lost ground, and then we had to make some cuts. Taking a non-reappraisal year with the threat of a recession is why you're seeing us be
I get
pretty
an abundance of
conservative.
caution, given the economic unpredictability. Would you, just on the citizen science, would you see that as an ongoing expense or one time? Because I would think of it as a one-time expense if you were to
Yeah, I
do
think
it
it would
through
be one
grants
time.
or
Correct.
people submitting proposals for studies they'd want to do.
It's one time.
Correct.
Under the additional FTE, the environmental/sustainability planner, are you thinking about that in the planning department or the natural resources department?
Right now, I'm thinking about it in the planning department and sort of grabbing prairie dogs, SES, and all of those other components.
I was curious
Yep.
because we have the SES coming as well, and I know that there are going to be implications for time and staff. And this is probably my next to the last question. Of the general fund balances, Jim, the 3.2 or the 3.3 and 3.4, are those already reflected in the 86 million of general fund revenues to be allocated or to be budgeted in 2020? Are they already there, or is this also to be added?
Mayor Bagley, members of council, so they are reflected to the extent that they fund proposed expenditures, one-time expenditures. The 1.6 million that we're putting in reserves isn't in the 86 million.
All right, but it's not like we've got 86 million, and oh, here's another 7 million.
No.
We're assuming that that's already in the mix that we've seen with the priority-based budgeting process, et cetera. It's already been allocated.
That's correct.
My last question then is, I didn't, and I should have, I suppose, I didn't know that we had is the 17 million from RTD, is that a real 17 million contingent then upon a $5 million match? Because I see the 2 million and that is actually 3.25?
Currently,
We're
with
needing
this 2
another
million, we'll bring us up to
1.75 to get to the
3.25,
5
yeah.
million. I just never realized there was a match required.
So there's a component of it when we started talking about, and I don't, Phil or anyone behind me. So when we started talking about it, they set up funding for the transit component of the station. We started talking about more of a transit-oriented development that would include mixed-use components with it. And in order to do that, then that's where the other local dollars had to come in order to leverage that and do something different than just a transit
Think of it
station.
as a TOD
Correct.
requires the match as opposed to.
And so what this will let us do is participate in the acquisition of property so that we can leverage it in terms of doing that broader development.
All right. Thank you.
Mayor, members of council, I think, and the only other aspect of that I'd point out, at least when it was first proposed and explained to me, is that ultimately, if those properties are resold, that money's coming back to the city.
Right.
So we're investing in it and hoping to get a return on it down the line.
And then when we look at the broader council goals and what we're talking about in terms of the development in that area, and not only on the transit side but on the steam side, and you see those conversations starting to come in, it's really bringing up a more holistic look to that area, and so that's part of it. Part of why I think we need to be more aggressive in putting money into it is because we also have the grant for Kaufman Street coming, and so we know what that timing is. And so we really need to start getting ready in order to get this transit station moving. That's obviously going to be connected with the RSVP work and the floodplain, but we need to be ready to move once all of this starts coming together.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I have almost the same question as Councilmember Peck asked. It's about the disposition of the public safety tax. Did we not make some hires this year in 2019 out of that? And so then, I know you can only hire at a certain pace. is this round of hires to be made in 2020 the last additional, or
Yes.
is there yet to be made?
Right, so Mayor Bagley, members of council, so the tax went into play, the tax increase, I should say, went into place in 2018. So that was year one. When we designed the tax, the intention was for 3 phases of, or 3 years of FTE being added. And so this proposed 2020 budget is the 3rd year and final in that sense. Now, it also, the hope was that regular growth from the sales tax would then be able to allow the public safety fund to add more FTE down the road, but not to the degree that we have the past 3 years.
All right, should we go on to the next presentation?
Yes, Teresa's going to lead this one.
It's only been an hour. We all doing okay?
Okay, Mayor and City Council, I'm Teresa Malloy, Budget Manager. And during this part of the presentation, we're going to focus on, or revisit, I should say, the conversation we had previously on the living wage. We're going to look at our priority-based budgeting, and then speak to you about the enhanced resources with metrics and the council work plan alignment. Touch on our one-time expenses in the general fund and the public safety fund, as Jim mentioned. Look real briefly at our incremental development revenue uses and then the marijuana tax. And to start off our conversation, I'm going to ask Joanne Zias to come on down as she's going to take you through the living wage conversation.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Wanted to give a little bit of additional information in regard to the living wage. There are 2 standards of measurement. There are actually more than 2 standards of measurement, but the 2 standards of measurement that are most frequently used, there's an MIT standard and there's a Colorado standard for law from the Center for Law and Policy. The standard that the League of Women Voters has been using is the Colorado standard for law and policy. And so as we looked at this to provide additional information, we use that. They are very similar standards. The difference between the two, there's a couple pennies on either side depending on which living wage standard you're looking at for family size. And then the Colorado Center for Law and Policy also will make differentiations for age of children, whereas the MIT standard does not do that. So there are some differences between the two, but to try to simplify the discussion, we focused on the numbers from Colorado Center and provided both to you in your packet. So a few numbers to look at. The one working adult number for 2019, or it came in 2018, but would also be used in 2019 for one working adult is $1,483. So if we were to continue with the standard we've been using in our pay plan, that would be the number that we would carry over. We have been using that number going forward. There are a couple other numbers that I wanted to highlight. The 2 working adults, 1 preschool child and 1 school-age child number would come out to 2032. The reason that I highlighted that number is because the 1742 that was recommended by the league is a combination of those 2 numbers above. So the thought process from the league was that those 2 numbers would kind of account a little bit on a conservative side, but account for different family sizes. In looking at those numbers compared to our regular employees, the amount in the 2018 pay plan and then continued in the 2019 pay plan was $1,365. The reason that number is consistent is because the number didn't update in between those 2 pay plans. The amount of $1,365 is equivalent to what that single wage earner was on that past slide. So if we were to just update that number, the number would be $1,483. So if we were keeping the numbers consistent, that would be the number we would use. If we were to change that standard, then we could update it to just about any standard that we feel is appropriate. The recommended standard from the league was that combination between the family size with 2 children and the single family size. So just a little bit of an explanation for that.
Mayor and council, so if council has questions on this living wage component for Joanne, now would probably be a good time.
Can I ask why? No, I'd like to wait till the end of the presentation. That's what I'm saying is that, I mean, we could really get off, we'll just wait till the end, because everybody right now has questions. We'll be here till 1. So we are not going to take questions. We will wait till the end. And you're not going anywhere, are you, Joanne?
Nope.
All right.
Okay, well then we'll keep going. Oops.
But I promise we will all get our questions answered.
Okay, so taking a look then at our priority-based budgeting process. So the city has utilized a priority-based budgeting process citywide since 2013. In the 2018 budgeting process, our priority-based budgeting was updated to incorporate the guiding principles from Envision Longmont as our desired results. As council is aware, this process includes several steps that end with a prioritized list of city services. The background information including these steps and the scoring criteria can be found on the city's website. And we provided in your council packet a link to the information that is on our city's website. The city's priority-based budgeting data has been updated now to reflect the dollars in our 2020 proposed budget. The quartile graph shown here shows the 2020 proposed budget, which is the darker blue bars that are on the top, and compares that to our 2019 adopted budget. For 2020, there is 54.9% of the proposed budget that supports quartile 1 programs, with another 30.1% supporting quartile 2 programs. It's important to understand that this is our operating budget only, so it does not include funding that is part of our capital improvement program or any funding that is allocated to debt service or any internal transfers between funds. That is not part of these numbers that are reflected up here because they don't go through the priority-based budgeting scoring process. We included a couple of attachments for you that has a lot of information. The first one was attachment L, which starts on page S50 of your packet. And that shows this quartile graph as well as the quartile graphs for all of our major operating funds. And then attachment M starts on page S55, and that is our complete list of all programs and that are included in our 2020 budget amounts, and those budget amounts are broken down by personnel, non-personnel, and total budget, as well as it shows you what quartiles each of those programs fall in. Each ongoing budget request is evaluated from the perspective of its alignment with our PBB programs. The graph on this slide shows our ongoing level 1 and level 2 increases by quartile for the general fund only. And we're going to be getting into more details regarding the performance metrics in just a bit with you. For now, I wanted to point out that the alignment, that aligning performance metrics with our PBB will provide one more tool set to assist with the evaluation of resources allocated during the budget process. And with that, I'm going to ask Melody Polero, who is our senior budget analyst, to come up, and she is going to take you through our open PBB data and what is available on our city's website.
Good evening. Just talk louder. Okay. Good evening. So what this link right here is showing you is, this is just our link to our city's website, if it runs. And we wanted to show you how the public can access all of this priority-based budgeting information and where it's located. So under our budget office page, we list all of the information that Teresa just touched on, but in a lot more detail here. And at the very bottom of this is our public open PBB data site. And I recommend running this site in Google Chrome. We'll see if I can get it to work here. So this is our open PBB data site once it loads. And I just kind of want to walk you through how it works, what we're providing to the public based on all of the information we've been gathering. So first I want to show you that we do have 3 years loaded, and we will update the 2020 proposed with the 2020 adopted once we adopt that budget. So across the top here are all of our community results, and if you click on each one of these, it gives the definitions of each of these results below it. And we also have our internal services, which are governance results, and those are defined below as well. And then we have an overall tab, which describes how these programs are scored and the detail behind those. And then you have another option to toggle over to our program attributes, and these are another piece of how our programs get scored. Sorry, it's a little slow. Sorry, it's being slow. So once those load, you would see the different types of program attributes, such as we have program mandates, if the program is mandated against a result, good governance, and how much the program supports or is, influenced by, influences these results. Sorry, I don't know why it's not loading, but anyways, I wanted to walk you through one of the housing services, amenities, and opportunities for all results. And as you can see, when I toggle through these, it changes these tiles below. And what these tiles represent are the different departments of the city and each of the programs that each of these departments have. And the larger the box, the higher the budget is to each of these services. And the darker the box, the higher that program scored against this result. So if I want to take a look at community services, I can click in their area, and it'll further break it down by the divisions within community services and which programs support those different divisions. And if I further want to go into the different programs in recreation that are supporting this result, I can see those in detail here as well. And by hovering over these programs, it provides you how that program scored against this result, the total dollars we are budgeting to this program, and the number of FTE that are supporting this program. And if you click into here, it gives you a definition of the program and then shows you the breakout of personnel and non-personnel costs, and also gives you a list of those positions that are allocated to this program and a list of the operating costs that are allocated to this program. So this is a nice view to see all that detail behind what we're putting into our priority-based budgeting process. And by toggling backwards, you can go look at different programs and areas that interest you. And then we also have a table option. And this is providing the same information in a table view. If you click more info, it gives you the same information you just saw in the tiles. But it's also searchable. So if you're looking for a specific program, you can search it here, and then it's exportable as well. Thank you.
So Melody is very instrumental in not only managing our PBB program, but managing all of our PBB data and updating all the information that you see on this website.
Well, she's doing this, and she gets into the forms that you all see as part of the positions, and we'll go more into the detail on that. But what we're trying to do is to then create a linkage to how we're measuring programs to this data set, so that it's in one view, and you're seeing it all integrated into how we're performing. And we've had some conversations about different software tools that will allow us to do that. So hopefully within the next year, we'll be able to move forward on that piece.
So earlier, Jim showed you the new FTE that are being added into the general fund, and he also mentioned that I was going to touch briefly on those that are going to be added in all the other funds. So we are adding a 3/4 time grant coordinator. That's a term-limited position that will help facilitate, administer, and manage grant applications. And then we also have 6 FTE in the electric and broadband fund to support the reorg plans that are underway in that area. These FTE don't really come at this point with an actual classification, as that is pending the reorg work that is going on within that department, but it should be finalized later this month. Next week, we will be bringing you a few corrections to our proposed budget. We are aware of some positions that the market in the pay plan was not correct, and so we've got to update those positions, as well as there are a few positions that we need to reallocate, I guess, if you will, between funds. We didn't have that allocation quite correct, and so we do need to correct that as well. There is one FTE, one 3/4 time FTE that is not new in our budget in the sustainability program. That is our economic sustainability specialist that was requested by PW&R to go to full-time. That did not get funded in our proposed budget, but it should have been funded in our proposed budget. So that is one additional one that we're going to be bringing back to you next week. And that is the only new, I should say, increased FTE out of all of these changes. The rest of them are just correcting salaries and adjusting fund splits. So you will see all the detail for that next week. So included in your packet are the attachments for the metric forms, as we've mentioned a few times now this evening. So attachment N, starting on page S80, is an overview of the services along with the alignment to our priority-based budgeting programs and quartiles. So that was just our attempt at summarizing and showing you the alignment to our PBB programs for all of the metrics forms that are included in attachment O. And so attachment O is a pretty lengthy attachment. It starts on page S83. And that is those strategic metric forms for each of the services that received a level 2 funding. This is still a work in progress, as we've mentioned, and for now, we have only had a couple staff that received level 2 funding fill out these forms. There are 43 of the forms included in your packet. We certainly welcome your feedback and suggestions on how these can be improved, and it is our expectation that over time, our plan is to utilize this tool for all of our priority-based budgeting programs. And this slide shows the information that the form has captured for those 43 different programs. It's certainly not our intent this evening to go through each of the 43 forms with you. However, I did want to go through just one of the services that received additional level 2 funding with you so that you get a sense of how we're using this form, how staff filled this form out. And the one that I wanted to go through with you this evening is the first one, so it's that very first form in attachment O, and it is for the city attorney's office. So as you saw previously, the city attorney has a proposed FTE increase for an additional assistant city attorney position. And so Eugene had filled this form out to show how that FTE will really support his service of legal advice to city council's official and staff. And so the form then also asks about priority-based budgeting programs and how the service aligns with the priority-based budgeting programs. And as you'll see in that attachment O, Eugene's service, legal advice to city council meets 2 quartile 2 programs, legal advice and support, and then contracts and ordinances. And it also meets 2 quartile 3 programs, and that's litigation and citywide project support. So then the form also asks questions to try to get at who is the recipient of the service. And so as Eugene noted, the service is provided to other city work groups as well as other city employees. So this is more of an internal service as opposed to some of the others that you see in the packet that are more outward facing towards the community. The form then also asks about the purpose of the service, and the purpose of legal advice to city council officials and staff is to ensure compliance with applicable law, advise decision makers, write ordinances, represent the city in legal proceedings, and then supervise drafting of legal documents. And then the form goes on to ask about why they provide the service and what is a brief history of the service. And so just to continue on then with Eugene's example, his example is, or his service is mandated by city charter. So those are the types of things that we would expect to see answers that you would expect to see answered in this question. And then the service, is the service being provided to a growing, stable, or a declining area? So trying to get a sense of, is this increasing, decreasing, or is it stable? And as Eugene answered, this is definitely for him an increasing area of support that he has been asked to provide. So then the form goes into the social, economic, environmental factors that affect the service. And according to Eugene's form, the city attorney supports the entire organization's legal needs. So whatever affects his client departments also affects him. And then it goes into the area of the goals. So what are the high-level goals that are going to drive the service? And what are 2 or 3 very specific goals that will drive that service? And so Eugene's goal, high-level goal, is the city council work plan. And his more specific goals are to be flexible, adaptable, and responsive to meet the needs of the organization. And then finally, the form identifies how the services and these goals are going to be measured. And so then Eugene's success is measured by meeting the most urgent needs in a reasonable and timely manner. So that kind of gives you a sense of how all of these forms have been filled out for each of the 43 different areas that we asked them to fill out. So we will be touching on just a few more of them this evening, but certainly if you have questions at the end of the presentation on any of them, we will be happy to try to answer that for you. And again, I just want to remind you all this is still a work in progress. And so some of these forms are more fleshed out than others, but we will continue to work on these as we go into then the next budget cycle.
So what I would also add to this is when we say this is a start, this information is going to give us the starting point. As you'll know, some are more developed than others as you look at the list. But then creating a team, when you look at how we look at our system and where we have metrics and measurements, we have some areas where we're really strong, and we have some areas where we haven't been engaged in the same amount of time. And so what I want to do is build a team of folks that will then take these and then dive in to then get very specific measurements in terms of the broader program. In this case, it's looking at one position. But I think you also then have to take this information and then go into the actual services that are being provided. And so what is the impact of the workload in terms of daily operations, and how do we hope to get more capacity on some of the more routine things based on having an additional staff person come in and assist with taking some of the complicated pieces. So when you look at this world and you look at public improvement agreements and how that works, anytime you have to pull somebody from that world into another world that is blowing up on us, then something starts lagging a little bit. So it's how do we connect those pieces and then use that as sort of the overall measurement tool to the effectiveness in terms of these positions. So this is really step one as we continue to evaluate this. And then, as I indicated, eventually what we want to do is then link it into the PBB system so we can see, are we being effective with how we're spending our dollars?
So this is the city council vision for Longmont's people. And the three goals, this was the exact slide that we showed you when we first presented the budget to you. And along with that, this is the dollars, both ongoing and one-time, that are included in our 2020 proposed budget that meets the council work plan for people. We have 3 of these items that we are going to ask staff to give you a brief presentation on. And those 3 are the investment in early childhood, the human service agency funding, and then the information exchange project. The rest of these, we didn't feel like we needed to have a formal presentation on because they're either very self-explanatory or not exactly new funds, just the continuation of the same programs that we have funded in the past. So the only exception of that to that is the no, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. So with that, I'm going to ask Karen Roney and Christina Sims to come up and speak to you about those 3 items.
Karen, could you just please stay seated? Okay, good. She said that she wasn't coming down, so just kidding.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Bagley and members of council. I'm Christina Pacheco Sims, Division Manager for Children, Youth and Families in the Community Services Department here at the city. I'm here to talk about the investment in early childhood, and specifically council's work plan goal A1.1, annually increasing the percent of Longmont 3- and 4-year-olds quality preschool programs. This is PBB quartile 2. And this is an outcome of Mayor Bagley's Education Summit held back in April. We had community members that came together and really shared ideas of gaps and enhancements in early childhood within our community. 4 areas were identified: transportation, cost of childcare, staff development, and licensing. So within those 4 different areas, what the Bright Eyes Steering Committee did was look at what were the greatest impacts that we could make in requesting funds within the 2020 budget. Where could we start? So we looked at really the staff development and licensing aspect of that, and requested $50,000 of ongoing resources and $150,000 of one-time resources in this investment. And And proposed uses for one-time funding included childcare provider licensing fees, staff development for licensed providers, and learning opportunities for informal care providers, recognizing that not all children are in licensed daycare situations. Proposed uses for ongoing funds also included just that ongoing continued training, coaching, and a peer mentoring model for providers. And how can we continue to educate and support our partners and community members as well as parents in this model as well. We also found out that within our early childhood system, many of our daycare providers have lower Colorado Shines ratings within Longmont. And so what we propose to do with the funds is look at how we can bring up those licensed providers to higher ratings. And what that translates to are higher reimbursements for those child care centers. And as we do that, that will provide more higher quality care for children. And by providing training for both informal and formal care providers, it will also increase the access to quality care for these children. So by also investing in funds in these areas, we can increase providers in Longmont, which will then provide more slots for children as well.
So on this one, they did ask, when it went into my budget review process, I think the request was for more ongoing funds. When I evaluated, I think the hard piece for me was really understanding what was truly ongoing funding and what was one time. And so I saw this as a way to step into it so we could get more focused on truly identifying those numbers in terms of what do we need to do on an ongoing basis and what is really fundamentally something that is in terms of seed money to get this started. I do anticipate as we continue working on this project and developing it into the future, we will have more clarity, which may impact future budget discussions as we move forward.
Right. We do have an idea of the cost of licensing. We know that, for example, with Head Start centers, that we know that the licenses are applied for annually, and it's $375 per center per year. And so when you look at some of the smaller centers, that can be expensive to do per year. And we know that many centers are going out of business, and so I think that contributes to the fewer number of slots that we have. So in looking at what we can do and the impact that we have, that was the reasoning behind looking at putting some funds toward licensing in the community as well.
Next, Karen Roney, Community Services. So I am here to talk about the next two requests that are proposed in the 2020 general fund operating budget. So one is the increase in the amount of money for human service agencies and actually increasing the set aside, as Jim and Teresa talked about this evening, from the current 2.05% of general fund revenues to 2.37. And as you may recall, we were back here, May, I believe, and talked about the longer term hope from the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board that over the next 3 years that we would increase that set aside in general funds to 3% of the general fund revenues. So this 2020 would be year one. And so what that does is that generates, I think as Jim mentioned, about $283,000 more for really funding two particular areas that we began to fund in 2018. So it would continue to provide support for our agencies that offer basic safety net services that are always going to be needed in our community. And at the same time, we requested that additional set-aside money to help us to really address two issues that we know we need to improve or enhance resources for in our system that we are involved in with helping adults who are experiencing homelessness to get into housing. So we, at that point in time, we made a recommendation and suggested that in 2020, for the homeless services side of things, that we were hoping to have $245,000 in funding for 2020 so that we could fund 18 locally funded vouchers for to help people exit out of homelessness who kind of were stuck in the navigation system. And we also asked for $45,000 to help with diversion services that really would help us up front to really, and for people who are new to the community, haven't been in Boulder County for very long, to really help figure out how we can divert them out of the homeless system that costs way more money, and figure out how we might be able to resolve an issue more quickly, or maybe assist with transportation if they have support somewhere else in the community. So the good news is we have some additional money proposed. And it isn't exactly the amount that we had hoped for, so we are recommending, we came close. So for that, our recommendation for that $283,000 is that we would take part of that money and partially fund the diversion services to the tune of $40,000 in 2020, and then to fund approximately 12 to 13 locally funded vouchers with the other $214,000. And then the remaining dollars, which is roughly $68,000, we would allocate toward an increase in money for safety net services for agencies. So we would hope that if council continues down the path to increase funding up to 3% over the next 2 years, is that what we would bolster in 2021 and 2022 would be really the safety net human service side of things, because those agencies are still hoping to rebound when we basically reduce that amount in half in 2018. So if we continue down this path in 2022, we will have, in essence, restored the Human Service Agency funding for safety net services to the level it was roughly before in 2017, and then have a fully funded system with Homeless Solutions for Boulder County to help adults experiencing homelessness to exit the system. And into housing, stable, permanent housing. So, so anyhow, on the metrics form, there's a couple of things, and Councilmember Waters probably remembers when he looked at and you all looked at the outcomes that were proposed by the human service agencies that we were funding, that they were kind of all over the board, and we talked about that we did need and want improvements in that area. In those contracts, each of the agencies proposes the outcomes that they intend to achieve with the funding from the city. And so in our metric sheet, we didn't have specific metrics that we could identify for you, but I do want to let you know that we're in that process of reviewing all the agency applications currently. And we did, back in June of this year, we did hold an outcome measurement session with all of the agencies, and really tried to identify that in those outcome descriptions that would be part of the contract, that we are looking for them to describe specific changes in 3 areas. One, the type of change that their service would have on the individuals they are helping, the extent of that change, and how they're going to measure that change. So we're reviewing the applications now. We're seeing some improvements in some of the outcome measurements, and we're seeing some opportunities for continued growth in that area, but we are really focusing on that. with the intent of being able to bring back some a whole list of outcome measurements for those agencies that are receiving funding for homeless services. Basically, we are in the process of revising and updating some of those outcomes. Specifically, the one that's really important right now is reporting how many people that are receiving homeless housing-focused sheltering or navigation services, how many of those individuals have successfully moved into permanent housing. And we are also beginning to measure, starting next year, the time that people spend in navigation and get into housing, so we know if we are able, that we are accomplishing our goal of really helping to move people more quickly out of an unstable, unhoused situation into housing. So that is the Human Service Agency funding, and I'm going to move forward because questions come later, right? So the next one is the, basically there's a proposal and one-time funding for $175,000 to fund what we have called our middleware information exchange system. And I would absolutely invite the city manager sitting to my right to jump in at any point in time. Several of us have been involved in this effort. But in essence, what we've been partnering with UC Denver and about 70 other agencies and community groups over the last 2 years to really look at how can we build infrastructure that would allow the various agencies that are involved in helping people who are vulnerable in our communities, particularly vulnerable adults, help us to be able to exchange information so that we can better coordinate care to those individuals and really have a better outcome, a more efficient use of resources. And because it's just really difficult to do that now. A lot of our data systems, and we even talked about within our own organizations, are siloed. There are protections for what you can share, which absolutely makes all kinds of sense because you want to protect people's confidentiality and their information. So, so we've been working with a group and to really look at how we can create that middleware system and pilot that in the city of Longmont. So this is not an integrated database, which means everyone has to load information in the same database. This is really a way for the various systems to be able to talk. So the systems that police use, the systems that senior services use, which are different. So how we can exchange information about common clients or residents that we are working with, and we might not even know that we're working with. This would be an opt-in system, so I would have to allow the government to, to get involved, and who gets to be involved in my care and sharing information, and help me to be supportive on in the community and get the care that I need in an efficient and effective way. So we have been part of a collaboration. We wrote a grant to the Colorado Health Foundation first part of this year. We were not successful in getting funding. We're back. We just submitted a $4.5 million grant to the National Science Foundation. It's a 4-year grant. It's kind of a university thing. And so we don't know whether that will be successful in getting funding. I don't think we hear about that until the next spring. So really this $175,000 allows us the opportunity in the city of Longmont to get started locally, to work with our own ETS department, to work with our partners at UC Health, to start this ball rolling so that we can at least have a system in place that would allow us to better exchange information. And I would invite Harold to ask anything, add.
So generally when we talk about this, I think the one thing that I found when we look at the system is we have a lot of programs. Let me back up a little bit. What I'm finding when I talk to the folks involved with the technology is the application of this is not only relevant to the social services that we provide, but it's also relevant to a lot of our daily operations where we're all touching the same thing, but we have different data sets. And so I think there's a larger organizational application that can come out of this. It's not just one-dimensional. So that's one piece. The second piece that we're finding is we have a lot of folks that are helping a lot of people. And what we're realizing in cases that I typically will get involved in or things that we're hearing is we don't know what each person is doing. And so there are numerous examples of where things could have been done much more efficiently and effectively, and there would have been a better outcome for the individual had we had the ability to connect the dots ahead of time. And that's really what this is trying to do, is to connect the dots so that when we're working and helping with someone, everyone who is on that person's team is connected and they know what's going on. I think it'll do a lot of things. I think it will allow us to have a more effective use of the dollars that we're spending and being more targeted in terms of how we're moving forward on these pieces. This is not only a City of Longmont component. We're actually working with some professors out of the Newcastle, England? Edinburgh, sorry. Edinburgh, they've been trying to work through one of these issues. Dr. Neese, who is with the University of Colorado School of Health, who's doing this, was also engaged in this with the University of Michigan, and so there's a connection there. This is really a problem that all cities are trying to deal with, and I think although it's been painful at times as we've been moving through this, I think we're at the point where we can really create something that can help us be more proactive and engaged in managing a number of issues beyond just the scope of the social service world with this, and that's why I felt like we needed to put some seed money into it. We're also having conversations with our local hospitals. I can't tell you how many times they release someone that we may have a social service person working with, but they release them earlier than we thought they were going to release them, and then everybody's scrambling at the last minute to try to deal with that individual. This is an attempt to really get a hold of these types of issues.
And the only other thing I would add is that actually our neighborhood group leaders association and some of the neighborhood groups are looking at forming a new kind of a support network within neighborhoods, and this would also be a resource that they could access to help their neighbors that with their care and support in the home. So that is all for Karen Roney. Who's next? I don't know who's next.
Okay, we're going to now move into the City Council vision for places and the council work plan around places. So again, just the vision and goals associated with that. And then the slide here shows the funding, both ongoing and one time again, of funding support in our 2020 budget that supports the places component of the council vision. So many of these we've already previously talked about, certainly the funding for the First and Main Transit Station, as well as the environmental/sustainability planner. We have $25,000 for funding for code updates around sustainability in building inspection, and then a couple of sustainability items that you're going to hear about in just a little bit. Also the $150,000 of one-time resources for the Steam River Corridor, and then finally $50,000 of one-time dollars for the Front Range Community College capital campaign. So at this point, I'm now going to invite, I believe it's Lisa Knobloch, to come up and take you through the sustainability component.
And while we wait for her, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
ahead and get started again. We'll turn the time back over to our 2020 sustainability budget people.
Great. All right. Mayor Bagley and council members, I'm Lisa Knobloch, the Sustainability Program Manager. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay.
We can, but Times Call can't. Just get right up
Okay.
in there.
Yep. That better? Okay. All right. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager with Public Works and Natural Resources, and I'll be touching on some high-level recommendations for or requests for the sustainability budget for 2020. Thank you. Haven't been up here in a little while. Okay. So as you know, the sustainability program is focused on achieving the city's sustainability vision and implementation of the city's sustainability plan and other sustainability efforts. Just some highlights from the work that we've been doing in 2019 are focusing on greenhouse gas reduction, including work on the Just Transition Plan, the CARE program, which is the Low Income Energy Efficiency Program, and the Commercial Benchmarking Program, which LPC has requested a position for in 2020. We hired the Water Conservation and Sustainability Specialist, that's Francie Jaffe, and she's focused on implementing and overseeing the Water Efficiency Master Plan and other sustainability projects, including the Just Transition Plan. That's one of her projects that she's leading. We've developed and launched the Sustainable Business Program, which has gotten quite a bit of press and a lot of support from the business community. We kicked off the Regional Air Quality Monitoring Study with Detlev Helmig. We conducted Equity Foundation's training with directors and staff that just wrapped up a couple weeks ago. And we've been working with the Community and Neighborhood Resources Division and Community Services to develop the Sustainable Neighborhood Solutions Program, which is a program focused on outreach, education, and capacity building on the neighborhood level through sustainability. Sustainability requests include one-time funding to begin updating the sustainability plan. That'll be starting in the second half of 2020. We have a couple other things that we want to do in the first half of 2020, and then that's likely also to be extended into 2021 as well. Funding support for greenhouse gas reduction strategies, which include the greenhouse gas inventory update and EV readiness plan, and focusing on an electrification strategy. The continuation and completion of the Just Transition Plan, support for neighborhood-based programs, again, that's in partnership with community services, funding support for economic vitality strategies, particularly the Sustainable Business Program, and funding for a 3/4-time grant coordinator, which was mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation. That's $30,000 that we are requesting, and then an additional $30,000 will be requested through the sustainability tax that's coming also in 2020. Uh-oh. There we go. So as you all are probably familiar, beginning in 2020 and extending through 2035, we'll have the sustainability tax money coming from the county. It's projected to bring in just under $8 million per year. 6% of that revenue will be divided amongst the municipalities based on population. So Longmont stands to receive about $125,000. We're required to put in a 25% cash match. That's about $30,000. We'll go through an annual application process and an annual report and presentation to the Boulder County Commissioners. They're hoping to set it up as a 3-year IGA, although that hasn't been finalized as yet. The focus for this funding is particular to environmental sustainability under the topic areas of energy, water, waste, local food and agriculture, and transportation. We're also establishing a sustainability fund for the purpose of funding and implementing sustainability initiatives. That fund will be funded through grants and other intergovernmental revenues like the sustainability tax, as well as other city funds which are already contributing to sustainability initiatives. So you'll see that come through as an ordinance in the package of budget ordinances that are coming back to you all in October. The sustainability metrics has been talked about. The Longmont indicators, which I've talked to you about before, is now up and live. That's housing all of the Envision Longmont and sustainability indicators and metrics. It's longmontindicators.com. It still is, we're going through some cleanup work on that. We had pretty limited budget to work with the consultants on putting that together, and so we're doing some in-house cleanup, but that is live, so you can go on and you can see our targets under each of our topic areas, our baseline data, how we're meeting those targets, and then some of the things that still are yet to be determined in terms of how we're going to be collecting and measuring some of those indicators and metrics, particular to the social equity components and the qualitative things that are a little bit harder to figure out really how to measure and track progress. As I've spoken to you all about before, we have community-wide indicators that are our bigger picture goals around air quality standards, greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, waste diversion rate, water consumption, things of that nature, as well as programmatic indicators looking at number of projects done through neighborhood-based programs, program participation numbers, pollution prevention numbers, things like pounds of trash diverted or water saved through different programs, cost savings, and then number of resources available. So that's a pretty big picture, what we're focusing on for sustainability.
Okay, so we're going to move into the one-time expenses in the general fund.
That was a good presentation. Thank you, Lisa.
Our one-time expenses get categorized by capital equipment, IT equipment and improvements, non-capital, which is essentially small equipment and supplies, and then one-time services and expenses. So as Jim had mentioned previously, we have over $4 million in total of one-time expenses in the general fund. That is offset, though, by other one-time revenues, such as transfers from other funds, the tree mitigation reserve, which will offset exactly $186,000 of tree mitigation expense. That is for EAB tree mitigation. We also have just under $95,000 of incremental development revenue that's being used on a one-time basis, as well as $220,000 of one-time property tax and $436,000 of one-time use tax. So our net one-time in the general fund is $2.9 million. Attachment P, which begins on or is on page S169, details all of the one-time items that are included in the general fund laid out by each of those four categories. And then same thing in the public safety fund. Again, we identify them based on those same four categories. And total one time in the general fund is in the public safety fund is 1.36 million. And that is detailed on attachment Q, page S170. In regards to our incremental development revenue, so in our prior budgets, incremental development revenue base was 120 dwelling units. With this 2020 proposed budget, we are proposing that we increase that base to 200 dwelling units. And so what I mean by base is that up to, in this case for 2020, 200 of those dwelling units is part of our base revenue that's in the general fund. So that is not incremental development revenue. Anything above the 200 level is what we would then consider incremental development revenue. So incremental development revenue comes from building permits on new dwelling units, as well as plan review fees on new dwelling units. So again, it's only new dwelling units that is considered incremental development revenue, and only above that 200 permit level. And the reason that we are proposing that we increase the 120 dwelling unit base up to 200,000 or up to 200 dwelling units is several reasons. So when this policy was originally created several years ago, the city was at a very low point in terms of permit activity. And 120 units was that low point. And at that time, we wanted to make sure that we were protecting our ongoing base revenue. And so we set that financial policy at that lowest dwelling unit level of 120 permits. What this has kind of resulted in is planning and development services using incremental development revenue to hire staff as term limited when funded, term limited FTE that are then funded with this incremental development revenue. Some of these staff could be funded for a very long time before the 120 benchmark of permit activity is ever reached. Planning and development staff believe many of these resources that are funded by incremental development revenue will be needed even if and when that benchmark is ever reached. So this year, we reassess the permit history and the revenue from the number of dwelling units from permits, and are proposing to reset that benchmark to 200 permits as opposed to 120. Using the 200 dwelling unit base, there's a total of $1.37 million in incremental development revenue from 720 of those new dwelling units in the proposed budget. And this is very hard to see on this slide, but it was included in your packet. Of the $1.37 million of incremental development revenue, just under 1.28 of it is used to cover ongoing expenses that are subject to reduction in the event that this level of revenue is not sustained in the future per our incremental development revenue financial policy. As you can see here, there are no new FTE or ongoing additions for 2020 that will be covered with incremental development revenue. All of the ongoing IDR funding was funded in prior years. These revenues will cover the same FTE and line item budgets as they did in 2019, just adjusted for salary increases. And then there is $94,755 that is being used for one-time expenses for the Envision Longmont update.
This IDR category, we're going to have to spend some time on it over the next year to really understand what's ongoing expenses with this and what truly is the result of the increased development. Because as that potentially starts trending downward over time, we're going to need to be ready to handle that workload via our traditional funding structure. So we're going to be spending some time on this over the next year, really digging into what that looks like in the future.
The last item we're going to talk about is the marijuana taxes. Council's aware the special tax is a 3% tax. Half of that is dedicated to be used for affordable housing. The budget for it in 2020 for the whole 3% is $274,000. So there's been no designation of the other half of this. So there's $137,000 of revenue in this fund in 2020's budget that so far right now at this point is not earmarked. And I think city manager wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I think as we look at this, so obviously Jim talked about the additional 675, but one of the things that I've seen over the last year in terms of this budget is really relates to special projects or special items that have come up mid-year that we've looked for funding, tried to find funding on in order to carry those forward. One of the things council can consider in this when we take what we discussed related to what the potential future is going to look like in terms of, is there going to be a recession, is that we could potentially use it as one-time funding, or we could hold it for those unknowns that come forward and hit us. This year, I believe we used some of that. What was the funding we used to help with the staffing issues in the outside counsel?
We used $40,000 for legal staffing, We used 25,000 for program reviews. And then the third item was, does not come into, it's the library feasibility study for 25,000.
So those were things that we didn't have planned in the budget, but because this wasn't budgeted, we actually had the ability to move that forward. And so something we can think about is really using this as a contingency fund that I can have available to me should we have special projects come develop in the middle of the year that we can move forward. But again, council can direct us as to how you all want us to utilize that.
Councilmember Martin. This is the end, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
this is in.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I have two questions for Ms. Knobloch. Still back there? One is, how do you spell longmontindicators.com? Does it have a hyphen, or is it all in one word?
It's all one word.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And then on the sustainability plan, it looks like it's pretty steady in the way that the different items on the plan are funded, and the rework of the sustainability plan is scheduled for the second half of the year. In the meantime, Boulder County has declared a climate emergency. City of Boulder has declared a climate emergency. The City of Longmont is being petitioned to declare a climate emergency by a group of our citizens. Should we have more of a sense of urgency in this plan than we do? Because I'm just thinking, what would it take to put some speed onto affecting the changes that are going to reduce our greenhouse gas footprint? And has that been considered in this budget?
Has it been considered in the budget? Councilmember Martin and council members, yes, exactly. That's one of the reasons why when we put the plan together in the first place, we had a 5-year update built into that as a recommendation, because the field is changing quickly and we are recognizing some of the limitations that we had at the time that the plan was originally done, was that we would be able to revisit that plan so it wouldn't just be a static plan on the shelf, and that the plan could change as the community changes and as priorities change as well. So the format of that plan in particular isn't set in stone. The things that we want to cover in the beginning half of the year to inform that plan are things like the EV readiness plan and the greenhouse gas inventory, to provide some of that foundational data to create a more robust focus on climate action in the update to the plan in particular. The budget itself was looked at for $50,000 for 2020, and then, as I said, looking at extending that into 2021, so an additional $50,000 in 2021 to complete the update of the plan in 2021, because I don't think that the 6 months in 2020 will be enough time to complete the update of the plan.
I guess I was asking what kind of additional resources would it take to pull that in? Because I would like to see it go faster. And, you know, if policy initiatives are going to be changed, I don't think you've got enough resources in there to adapt to them at speed. So is this the 5th year? Is this a scheduled update, or are you updating it ahead of schedule? Because
It's updating 1 year ahead of schedule, and one of the reasons why we bumped it up a year was because of the update to Envision starting next year, and we thought there was a lot of alignment to be doing those plans concurrently so that we can look at some of the bigger and longer term policy issues that are incorporated in Envision and some of the more action-oriented strategies in the sustainability plan, so we could be doing those things together.
But it's not been pulled in because of changes in new data about the rapidity of climate change.
Not in particular.
Okay. Maybe we should.
Dr. Waters?
Thanks, Mayor Bagley. Just building on a little bit, because one of my questions would have been in a minute, but I'm going to follow up. Anticipating that we are going to see a climate emergency resolution, there is no contingency in this budget anywhere, it looks to me like, to do anything if there's a recommendation that has dollars tied to it. Is that a fair conclusion?
Mayor Bagley, members of council, actually, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that we do have $150,000 of contingency that is one-time money.
I highlighted the 150,000 contingency, no department, in the one-time list.
Right.
Because I'll have questions about that. Not tonight,
sure,
but as we go on. I did see that. So that's kind of where you'd think to draw from.
As I mentioned a couple weeks ago, during the year we'll have these questions of, hey, where can we find money for this or that? And that's why we put that money into the budget.
Are you assuming that that's going to be because of what decisions we make, say, on the marijuana tax, or?
It was for almost any purpose, it
whatever.
seems like.
Okay.
I'm reading an email right now asking me to find money.
So a couple things. When do you need direction? This is unrelated to the sustainability plan. When do you need direction on the living wage? Tonight?
We don't need it tonight, but I think we will need it, when is that scheduled? The first meeting in October?
Yes, Mayor Bagley, members of council, we've scheduled to get final direction the first week of October. If you could give it earlier, it probably makes it a little bit easier for us because we got to put a budget together within 7 days from the first meeting in October to the second. Although this may not have a budget impact that we need to get it into. So either way, next week or the week after.
So you don't need it tonight?
No, definitely not.
All right. Do you want it tonight?
Well, we got time.
That would, if council wants to give us direction on that tonight, we can definitely, that would help in terms of.
Well, I saw in the presentation, it looked like at $17.42, it looked like it was a minimal effect for full-time or full-time Longmont city employees who are benefited. What's the effect if we include the language in our solicitations or in the contracts with vendors that we've adopted a living wage of $17.42, and based on the whatever the calculator is, that we expect $17, a living wage of $17.42 to be paid to any employees billing time to a Longmont city contract.
So when I think we received the same email that council received, and I know there was a lot of conversation about positions and everything got jumbled, and so the distinction in that email was that it was for full-time contract positions.
Yeah.
And that is a distinct difference because
I know,
many of the positions
it just eliminates a lot of confusion and complexity.
It eliminates a lot of confusion, and we think that based on what we've seen, the impact will be minimal based on the full-time.
Even with our contract, even with contracts. And then we would add the language to the contracts.
Now there's an unintended consequence to that. And I think that's part of our job is to talk to you about those unintended consequences. Sure. What we don't know, and I don't think we will know until we get into this, is that when you do that, people always take certain actions in response to what we do.
Yeah.
Theoretically, they could just hire part-time positions, and so that is an unintended consequence.
To not have unbenefited people or people without benefits.
And so then you actually have a different issue that you're dealing with in that conversation. But if it's full-time and it's at $17.42, based on what we're seeing, we don't see that will be as significant an impact. Is
Well,
that
then I'm
correct,
going
Jim?
if the direction tonight helps, I'm going to move that we direct staff to include the $17.42 minimum, $17.42 living wage for our staff, for contractors, and that we add to our contracts the language that stipulates that expectation for contractors.
For full-time positions?
For full-time positions, yes.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. There's people in the queue, but I'm assuming it was on this particular issue. Okay, Councilmember Finley?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. My question on that is just one of process. Since we use comparisons with other towns to base our salaries, what does that do to that? How much would that change that?
I think in terms of our full-time positions, we only have one full-time position that this would impact, correct? And that's the library page. Everybody else in full-time positions, they are above
They're above that anyway.
1742.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Waters?
Thanks. I just had a couple more questions, and I'll try to get through them. So I want to say thank you for the work that you've done on the metrics. And I understand it's a work in progress, and there's variability, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. And I do think ultimately, in terms of program evaluation, it's going to add to the ability to evaluate effects, right, for the investments we're making. So I will say, just as a general observation, given the variability I saw as I looked at I didn't read in great detail all 42 or 43 of them, but I did read them, or read some more carefully than others, I guess. I do think it would be worthwhile, however you do this, to pick out a few that you see as exemplars, that, for other staff, or that we could then, if you had some that were exemplars, we could bounce them back and forth between council members and key members of you and key members of your team to kind of refine what would exemplars look like one in each department as a model for people to use. Because it was clear that there's more challenge in terms of evaluation. How would you evaluate effects in some areas than others, right? Some are more easily evaluated than others. I would say, if the conclusion is this can't be evaluated, right? Because I did see some of that. This can't be evaluated. I would say, well, then you don't need any more money. If you can't evaluate it, don't ask for more money, as a general principle. So, on the community services budget, I tried to clarify with Karen what we heard. What would be the additional cost if we were funding 18 vouchers and the $45,000 for diversion? Because it sounded to me like it's 13 vouchers with this number, and I think the $45,000 for diversion was in there as well. So she's showing me it's 40,000, not 45. And if we were to fund that at 18 and 40, if that's what you needed, where does that leave the agency budget? I think Karen, you said it's still a tick up, just the natural growth of additional $68,000. I just want to make certain we're not taking it away from the agencies to do the agency funding to do what we're seeing here.
So Councilmember Waters and Mayor and City Council. So if basically council directed us to invest the entire $280,000 in the diversion and the vouchers, that basically would leave no growth for the human service.
That's not what I would suggest.
Right.
My question is, if we did everything we talked about in May for vouchers and diversion and saw the growth in the agency budget, I think what I heard you say is that would be an additional $68,000 on top of the $1.5 million or whatever I saw here.
What I tried to indicate is that 68,000 was the growth. If we just would have kept the 2.05 the same and not increased it, the growth in that 2.05 would have been $68,000.
So if we were at 2.32, is that the number? 2.37.
2.37.
So before we finish this all out, I understand you know, there are implications for what we do, but I'd like to know what those numbers are at least. At 2.37 for the agency budgets, and to do what I understand we're working our way towards the 3% in increments. But at least to know what the number would be if we were funding 18 vouchers. I'm not going to move direction to do anything. I just would like that information.
18 vouchers would be $245,000.
Plus the 40.
Plus
and
45.
Plus 45.
Right.
So,
which is, $290,000. $290,000.
On top of what we see here?
That would be the total amount. So I could do the math,
If
not
you would do
right
that,
here,
I would sure
and I can do
appreciate it.
that and come back.
Hold on one second. We're going to give you the floor black, we're going to give you the floor back, but let's go ahead and take care of the motion.
I'm not making a motion.
No, you already made a motion. There's a motion on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah, so, what?
I did make a new motion. You're right. I'm sorry.
Right, you made a motion. So let's go ahead, and we can make motions and vote tonight. We just can't pass ordinances and second readings and whatnot during a study session. So Mayor Pro Tem, do you have something to add to the motion that's on the table pertaining to the motion to?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm in support of this, and I'd like to add some information. Because when we talk about the information that we got in our packet, talks about the MIT study and about Washington's study. When we talk about these things, we always sort of refer to we always preference the two-parent, two-child nuclear family. However, if we look at the demographics that actually exist in the United States now, that is what I think all of us on this city council grew up with, and it's a great idea. However, that is now about 32% of the population. It isn't the reality of what's going on. In 1960, 6% of people lived alone. Now, as of 2018, now this depends on whether you're looking at Pew studies or at the American Community Survey, but somewhere between 28 and 35% of Americans are living alone. People and an additional 18% of the population consists of single parents and children. So those people who live alone actually they are financially really vulnerable, and they tend to be the younger people, the older people, and also single parents with their children. These are among the most vulnerable, and their costs are more than people who are married, who have an efficiency of scale. Because, for instance, if I move into a studio apartment, I pay the same as a couple that moves in. The couple who lives next door pays the same utility, if it's included in the rent, as I do, even though they use twice as much. If I go to stay at a motel somewhere or a hotel, I pay exactly what a couple pays. There are many, many, many costs to living alone that make it more and more difficult. And when we're talking about a living wage, we always seem to use the two-parent, two-child nuclear family, which is not really what's going on demographically. So I am totally in support of this because we have more people who are living, I mean, we just have not kept up at all with the wages. And I do think that we need to, we can afford to, and we need to give people a living wage. Thank you.
All right, there's nobody left in the queue, but so my question is, again, you're saying that if we pass this, the only full-time employee that it will affect is a library page?
Yep.
Okay. And then the other question is, how will this impact the League of Women Voters' request to actually make sure that it is paid by contract employees as well? Meaning, is your understanding that this also includes them? Or separate issue?
That was the motion.
Okay.
And we
In
would
a
have to
sense
put
of-
it in our purchasing.
So full-time employees, or just the jobs they're doing for the city? Part-time employees? How are you interpreting this?
I heard full-time.
Okay, so if someone is doing contract work for the city, they also have to pay their employees full-time, even if it's just one job for the city.
That's a different.
No, what I'm saying is, Dr. Ward, I mean, what I'm asking is, I want to just clarify. So for example, I can understand the library page. I'm all for that. Don't even know his or her name, but congratulations, you're about to get a raise, I suspect. But my question is, if I'm a contractor and I do work for the city, there's a variety of scenarios. Scenario A is, I'm going to do one job for the city, but I can't get it unless all my full-time employees are 1742, was it?
1742, but that wasn't the motion.
That wasn't your motion?
No, it was not.
What was your motion then?
The motion was that those people billing time to contracts, full-time employees billing time to contracts with the city of Longmont would be paid $17.42.
Yeah, right. And so I guess, but my question, but it's full-time only?
Full-time.
Right?
But if they're billing a contract just someplace else?
Yeah, so scenario is simply, and I'm just trying to clarify. So if I'm a contractor and I come to the city and I want one job, and that job is to shovel the snow one time, first snow of the year out front of the city hall, right? But that's the only job I have. Does your motion mean that I can't compete for the bid unless I always pay my employees $17.42 full time?
Whoever's shoveling that snow for the city of Longmont's going to be paid $17.42.
But I could pay them $15 on all other jobs.
If they're a full-time employee and they're billing time to the city of Longmont, they're going to be paid $17.42.
Okay, so just for those particular jobs.
It's only the
Got it.
And if they're a full-time employee.
Okay, all right, let's vote then. Nobody else is in the queue. Yeah, to clarify, the motion shall read at least. All right, that passes unanimously. All right, Dr. Waters?
I'll be quick. This is my last one. I just want to say just one more thanks for what you did in listening to the council work plan priorities and reflecting that in the budget. I'm aware that because I am the liaison to NGLA, that we haven't increased the funding for neighborhood improvement grants for a long time. We budget $50,000. It's fun to see what the neighborhoods do with that money. It is a big bang for a dollar for the city. So I love the idea, Harold, of giving you more discretion in terms of I would say half that marijuana tax. Can we find some $50,000 someplace to add to the neighborhood improvement grant fund, even if we think about it as one-time funding, and then see what happens next year?
Mayor Bagley, members of council, short answer would be yes. The longer answer is
maybe.
There's a lot of that money is backed up unspent. So.
Oh, that we're not spending.
Yes.
Huh. Well, that's a surprise to me.
I'm not sure why.
Well, that would be a good. That's a question I need to ask. What percentage of the 50?
I'm sure there's reasons why. I just know there's a lot of money unspent.
Well, it depends on the so we can look into it. I know there was one project on an underdrain system, but there was contingencies that an HOA be recreated. That may be part of what's unspent. We need to look into that.
Well, so the first question should have been, what percentage of the 50 do we spend? Because I had the impression that we exhaust that. And if we're not spending it all, then I'll rethink that. But that would be helpful to know, and then we can have the second conversation.
So the answer to that question, Mayor Bagley, members of council, currently, so it's $50,000 a year we've been budgeting for ever since it started, so forever, so whenever it was. We have $102,000 on hand right now. On hand.
I withdraw. So there's $102,000 in that fund right now.
I'm sorry, 102 carried over from 2018, and 50,000 then for 19 added on.
So they'll have 152,000 in that fund.
There may be commitments on some of that, but that's what
yeah,
how much we have.
Okay, well that's good. That's good to know. Thank you.
And we got to look in the projects too, because just like we do on our capital projects, sometimes they're bigger. Sure. We need to dig into that.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
when I brought forth the idea of legalizing marijuana in the city, it was partly because I was listening to the radio one day, and I heard that Arvada had legalized marijuana and dedicated the money from it to affordable housing. And I thought, yay, that's a good idea. This is one way we can have a steady funding stream for affordable housing in addition to what we have. When we talked about the fund going 50-50, we didn't decide what to do with the other 50% at the time. We did vote to have 50% go to affordable housing. We had also talked about involving it somehow in childhood education, which is one of our goals. What I would suggest, because we have talked so much about how the library is severely underfunded, the library is probably the most beloved institution in town. And we've talked about how, because it's not, doesn't have a steady stream, we don't allocate enough money to it. We talked about having it be a special district. But if it had the other 50% of the marijuana tax money coming to it, this might alleviate the idea for needing to do this. It also goes in well with the emphasizing early childhood education, which early childhood education technically is defined as 0 to 8. So we have a really wonderful library. We have a librarian who's very smart, very dedicated. We have all kinds of people who are dedicated to that library and do their best for it, and staff. We don't lack for talent and intelligence and commitment and community love. What we lack is money. And so I would move that we commit the other 50% of the marijuana tax to the library, because it goes very well with our council goal of committing to early childhood education. Do I have a second?
Oh, the Councilmember Peck seconded that. Okay. So we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Martin?
I like the idea of giving money to the library, but I think we have some other urgent concerns as well, including the one that I just brought up, that we may need to deal with climate emergency adjustments, and there are some active policy changes that need to go along with that. So I'm not sure that it's time to tie up that discretionary money yet.
Nobody's in the queue. I would vote for that on a future occasion. I just want some time. My question would be, what does staff think? What would staff suggest us using the money for? My gut says, hey, I think that's a great idea, but I would like to think about it, you know? Okay, let's think about it. I mean, yep. Because I don't want to vote against it, right. But then again, voting for it, and then if we vote tonight, then it's over. But can we put that on an agenda? The question being, how should this money be spent, and give us suggestions, and specifically include Mayor Pro Tem's suggestion relative to those other suggestions?
We can. I wanted to add something about the library conversation, so that you didn't see a lot in terms of what we funded in the library. Part of that was by design, because we're going through this study to determine where we want to be in the future and what do we want to do. And so that study will inform a lot of what that will look like in the future.
If you could present like a white page, and by white page I mean a 1-page or 2-page right. PowerPoint slide, yep. That'd be great. Dr. Waters?
Just on this question of the library, Nancy's is here, so we could ask her. I do know that this has been a topic of conversation with the library board, and it's my impression, although it wasn't highlighted, I did see the full-time campus supervisor that we saw in the budget go from, which was a temp or not an ongoing, I guess,
Correct.
to an ongoing, is an important change for the library. That's there. I saw 3D printers.
Correct.
There are a number of things that I've seen in the budget that I know are specific to the library that the library's been looking for. My impression is that the things that were submitted as part of the library budget that were critical to the library were funded in this budget.
Correct.
So those things were all covered. Is that
And
true?
That's correct, because and we had a specific conversation in the budget hearing about, we've had a lot of conversations about library. We're not seeing a lot, and it was, these are the critical items, but we want to, I'm going to look at, where's Nancy? I want to look at her and make sure I'm correct, but we wanted to get through the study to really understand what was that going to look like so we could get more focused on what the funding would need to be. And so that's really, and when you look at the position, you know, we can tell you that when we had somebody in that position, the experience of the patrons was much different than when that position was vacant. So we knew we needed to bring that on a full-time basis.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, I realize that we did fund a lot of things, but I'm sure we've all been to libraries all over. We could do so much more if we put more into it, and build more hearty relationships between the museum and the library. Every time we have, we get somebody in from, we can afford to hire, get somebody in to speak, it's sold out. It's, you know, there's so much more we can do, and it's good to have 3D printers, but looking at it in the future, when is that report going to come through?
I think it's at the end of the year, but I'm not sure exactly.
Okay. Yeah,
so Karen Roney, so we are in the process right now of signing a contract with the consulting group. So we have someone selected,
Okay.
and then our time frame would be that that report will be complete after probably about the first of the year.
Okay. Well, that would be a good time
Yes.
to decide to.
And
so when we talk about some of these other numbers, and we talk about the new revenue, and then you know, there's some things we need to be cognizant of. We need to be cognizant of the fact that when you look at the indicators, a lot of us sit in our investment oversight meetings, and we're hearing, and I've said this a lot tonight, potential for a recession in the future. Yes. I know we have excess money. We need to be cognizant of this, because if that happens, we don't want to end up in a place where we were in previous budget cycles, because then you lose ground. So that is a way to help manage that situation. If we're not in a recession and we get a study back and it says, here's what you can do, those are revenues that would be available to then potentially start making progress on it. And that's why you hear me say one-time funding makes sense, because it gives you options once some of these studies start coming through, and we have a sense of what it's actually going to take to move forward on these projects. Probably the most direct you've seen me in some of these budget conversations, but those are things that are in my mind that I need to let you all know about. So if you wanted to say, we want to do this for the library, you could hold it theoretically, and then based on what the study says, you can be more focused then on how you fund it. There's other pieces to Councilmember Martin's question about the study in terms of updating the sustainability plan. I'll have to look at capacity internally, but that's a one-time expense, because that's not an ongoing piece. That's a different question. So when you're seeing us nuance these, that's what at least I'm looking at in my mind when we make these decisions.
Yeah, I understand that, but I also know the library needs more money than we're giving it on a steady way. So anyway, I think that's a good idea to wait until the study comes in and then make some decisions.
And the only thing I disagree with is you said potential recession. The yield curve switched, flipped in January, inverted in January.
Yeah, we've been
within the next year, we're going to have a recession if the economy continues like it has since the dawn of time.
Yeah, the indicators obviously have me concerned.
Yes. All right. So the other question, I guess the only thing I have is, and I was the one that mentioned I'm quiet a lot, not often, but on this topic I am. And that is I'm the reason I brought up, and I thank Peg Goodbody, Sarah Levison, people who are advocates for early childhood education, because I mean, basically the studies that I've been shared, or the studies I've read, the studies that people have shared with me in this field is that if we focus on early childhood education, specifically high quality preschool, then things like living wage, affordable housing, homelessness, substance abuse, mental health would be alleviated more than we can imagine. But the problem is that politically, it's hard, because if we get behind and put a bunch of money towards a bunch of preschoolers, I mean, we're not going to see the results for 30 or 40 years, and I mean, where's the political hit? Where people? I mean, where's the gratification instantly? And so as we talk about these things, and I'm looking at the slide that says $50,000 of ongoing and $150,000 one-time funding for investment in early childhood, I don't think that's enough. And I also think that we tend to. My concern is that high quality preschool. While I recognize the fact that struggling moms, single parents, families who aren't earning a living wage struggle for daycare. There's two members of council and I have talked about it, and but there's two categories, if you can imagine two circles. Circle number one is education, right? Circle number two is childcare, and they intersect, right? As we talk, I'm concerned that we begin to lose focus on the educational piece, right? And just start talking about, improving licensed daycare facilities, or increasing, working parents' access to daycare. Well, that's awesome. I think that I would personally like to stay focused on, if we're going to be focusing on daycare, it needs to also have that educational component. And while I could agree that, I mean, when I was growing up, my preschool was a stay-at-home mom that loved and cared for me, but we're talking about those 500 kids that do not have access, for whatever reason, to a high-quality preschool. And so as we talk about, as we talk about all these programs, I'm sitting here looking at $2 million at the main and the transit station, or all this one-time funding, and it's just that the biggest bang for our buck, if council would have the discipline to just focus on our kids for the next 40 years, our problems would be alleviated. Now, I don't think that's realistic politically. I just don't think that's a winner. But I think we definitely need more than $50,000 of an ongoing basis. And I think that $50,000 should be directed at specific education. It could be daycare and education, but it needs to have an educational component rather than simply daycare. So those are my thoughts. And I don't know what motion I'd make other than, I move that we need more funding, and that this funding be directed towards education. Daycare's fine, but it has to be education. Specifically I agree with Mayor Pro Tem that it's 0 to 8, but specifically it's those preschool years that they say really is most effective. I mean, the earlier the better. Meaning, if it was possible, let's take the babies from the parents and educate them. No, I'm not saying that. But all right, Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Actually, I agree with you. And when we had the Friday meeting that I went to about actually this topic, there were some ideas about funding that were thrown out. And I think that's the discussion we need to have, is what are the other funding opportunities for preschool, and how do we, as a council, move forward with those? One of them was the preschool district, and then we talked about HOAs perhaps having a fee that funded preschool, maybe a TIF on new development since they are bringing in the kids. Just different things we can look at so that it isn't totally our general fund that is funding these preschool ideas. But I do agree with you that we need to focus on the education part as well. So if we could continue the work of finding ideas and other sources for funding this, maybe in the first quarter of next year, and then look at what is available in the budget if we don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Dr. Waters?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Just so building on the same theme, Councilmember Peck and I and Mayor Pro Tem were all at the same meeting on Friday afternoon. And remarkably, staff and folks in the community ought to know, a group of kind of loosely coupled group of people who have been meeting to talk about how to move the dial, Mayor Bagley. And the focus had been, how do you move the dial coming off the summit in April on those priorities? And the staff, I think, did a really terrific job. As the way they rolled up the proceedings from the April event into the graphic that we got from Olga not too long ago. I mean, it was a really clean way to show what kind of the informal network, what the challenges and solutions are, what would be more formal in connection with the school district, and then what would be more formal in terms of licensed opportunities. The Friday event was really part of a strategic planning process that was triggered by Senate Bill 63. So a group came together, the mayor was there as well, to collect these data to identify challenges and solutions for 0 to 3 care. Where that conversation went to, I was in a meeting yesterday afternoon as a follow-on to that. And I will tell you that that discussion was about what is the Venn diagram that you take from what happened on Friday, you take from what happened in April. And there's a set of challenges and solutions or responses that are the sweet spot. And part of what Christina mentioned tonight in terms of the shine scale, if we're going to spend $1, let's spend $1 to make certain that whether it's daycare or a preschool program, we're moving them to higher quality that's focused not only on care, but on learning. Right? And I think we can do that. But I think that is part of the discipline, to make certain that we really target how those dollars are going to be spent. And I think that we have some rich data set now from these two events. And I think there is clarity on what the best investments, what the best returns would be on investments. Just we need to make certain that that's how we're going to spend those dollars.
Is that your understanding of, have we had a motion, or is that staff's understanding that basically the dollars should be spent for education or education and daycare rather than just daycare? Meaning that the dollars should be spent towards something that has let's increase the educational component, or increase the quality of education component.
Absolutely, Mayor and council members. So it really is about quality early childhood education.
Okay.
So I don't think Christina really even talked about daycare.
Yeah,
So
I just
so
wanna
it
make
really
sure.
is about quality, and there's the
Then my only
diagram.
concern is
So-
50,000 isn't enough. Okay. All right, cool.
Well, and I think part of that too, again, why I said what we did is we didn't know what the target was. We felt like, based on what we were seeing, we knew 50 was probably ongoing, seed it with the other 100. But take you back to when we really went into the affordable housing and you said, let's hit $1 million. I agree that everything I'm hearing is saying probably not enough. As we define it, then that's where we target to really then start pushing. We have to be disciplined over probably a couple to 3 budget years to hit what that goal is. And we were disciplined on affordable housing when we brought $1 million in.
And I guess what I'm saying is stealing a line for the Mayor Pro Tem, I advocated for that $1 million in the affordable housing, and then we just totally put it on steroids over the last year and a half. I mean, I'd like to see that with early childhood, meaning that, it'd be great if we could find $1 million and then somebody say, oh, well, let's spend a year and a half figuring out how to just crank that up. So get the developers in here, another 12%. I'm kidding.
Yeah, but remember, we hit that with like a 200, and we stepped into it, and then we had a budget year, and we went, okay, we're done. Mm-hmm. In my mind, as I'm seeing this, that's what I would say.
That's fine. I'm not making a motion tonight for $1 million. I'm just saying that but that considering the impact that this money could have, 50,000 is not enough. Just my 2 cents. But
And there's other pieces that we can talk about when we get to the end of the budget.
okay, cool. Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, so it's really not just about money. Just as that affordable housing fund was not just about providing money, it was about providing money for a whole series of things like help with rent, people who are about to be I mean, it's used for helping people get counseling for financial problems, helping with people who are about to be evicted, helping fix up houses that are shabby. I mean, it's about a number of things. So similarly, I mean, and that was just that piece of it. And then we passed the affordable, the inclusionary housing ordinance, which was a very, very long thing. And that's just the beginning of what we need to do with affordable housing. We're not done with that. But this is also not a matter of just throwing money at it. We have many, many, many approaches, and I think what was so useful and helpful on Friday was hearing from different providers about why we can't just throw money at it, and also what we need to understand about what the state has done about the laws in the last year. And I will tell a little story here because I have some, because it's late and it's not that late though. So I worked for a strange little couple who had a greeting card company, and they had a baby, and they never really thought too much about it. They were just in love. So they had a baby, and then they thought, oh my Lord, what are we going to do with this baby? We have to take it to work. So then they started asking their employees what they did with their children. And nobody really had any good solutions. They were all struggling. So that couple decided they would start. They said, well, we've got an extra room. We'll hire somebody, and we'll have our own daycare center here where everybody can see their children. And so that couple were the parents of Jared Polis. So he has a very deep understanding of the usefulness of early childhood education. And he has done a great deal to get a lot of stuff passed on his own. And this state legislature this year has passed a lot. We have a golden opportunity to make the most of this, but a lot of it we don't understand. People aren't aware of how much was done in this last session that gives more support to people who are trying to get early childhood education. That was a big problem and still is. They have more grants. They have more opportunities. We need to educate ourselves toward everybody in the community, understanding the things that are now available to us that were not available to us a year ago. This is an incredible opportunity that we need to make the most of. So what they talked about Friday, as those of us who went know, is the difficulties of childcare is declining. And when I use childcare, I also mean the educational component, because good childcare is good education. It's not just sticking the kid in the corner and propping them up. So we need to approach it just as we do affordable housing from many, many different aspects. If we can't get enough providers and if we can't find enough places, then we can't increase good quality education or any even simple childcare. We have to think about all the aspects of this, and we have to view it as a community issue. It's a huge issue in Estes Park, where the mayor told me that there's no daycare at all. There's no childhood education, early childhood education, because everybody's left town. So we have to figure out how in this city we can increase capacity for providers and for places that are safe, that provide good quality, and how we can incentivize people to get into early childhood education. CU has a program. Front Range has a program. Somebody was telling me that they use interns from Front Range Community College. So we need to make connections between people and think about thoughtful ways that we can use whatever money we put in to give it to the right people who are actually using the resources that we now have newly available to us from the state to make the most of this and to really make a jump forward in early childhood education. So I'm just suggesting that we not simply throw money at it, but actually strategically think about this. And one of the suggestions is, one of my suggestion was, and some other people, that we get the business community involved in it too. If there are 5 businesses, it would be a benefit to their employees if they would pool some money, or at least partially fund something jointly that they could provide for their employees for a daycare center. This is just sort of an obvious thing. Jared Polis's parents did this in 1973. I haven't met another company that has done it since. It seems really foolish to me because it would be a great benefit to many employees. And if we educated different business groups about how much of a benefit this would be and how much of a commitment this would be for their future workforce, it seems to me this would be a great benefit to Longmont.
All right, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to mayor and council comments. But before we do that, we need to make sure, are all of us going to be there on Friday? Because city staff is preparing. You will not be here? Okay. So can we go ahead and move the conversation on Friday to the following Friday? Will everyone be here that Friday? Because city staff would like all of us to be there for homelessness discussions and solutions. So do you mind? Okay, is there an objection? Is anyone not going to be there next Friday? Yeah, not that I know of. Councilmember Martin? Or no? Yeah.
I don't know no, I'm sorry. October 18th is scheduled. No, I don't have anything next Friday.
Yeah, my only concern was I was hearing some folks may not be here, and I know that was a significant enough conversation. I wanted to make sure entire council was here for that.
All right, so let's go ahead and cancel Friday, and let's go ahead and move it a week,
okay,
if that's all right. To the 27th, yes. And we'll have a party. I move that staff bring donuts. No second? Oh, that's it. This is war, people. Oh, no, that's fine. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to mayor and council comments. What? On what? We didn't get a second.
I seconded it.
You seconded it? All right, it's been moved and seconded that staff buy us donuts. Let's vote.
We bring donuts. I will
All
bring
right,
donuts.
all right, consensus
I
vote.
may personally pick them up for you all and just do it that way.
All right, let's go ahead to mayor and council comments. Dr. Waters.
Just to recall that today is Citizen Day, or Citizenship Day. And if I think about the wonders of United States citizenship, or the benefits of it, and all those who aspire, seek citizenship in this country, and we ought to acknowledge what it means to be a citizen and encourage those who aspire to citizenship to stay with it.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilman Waters. Without citizenship, I wouldn't be here. I'd be in Denmark. Anyway, I would like to tell people that there are 2 events that would be interesting, I think, to go to. One is Hope is having a film on homelessness on the 6th. Oh no, on Friday, no, on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 6 o'clock at the Longmont Public Library. And on Saturday, the 26th, El Comité is having a farm dinner for a benefit at Olin Farm, and you can call at 5 o'clock. You can call El Comité for the tickets, and that would be a good thing to do, support them.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I would like to say that on September 21st, this Saturday, from 1 to 5 p.m., the Family Village, a community co-working child care center in Longmont associated with Colesolve co-working space, is having its grand reopening. So by supporting them, we can support high-quality child care that is employer-sponsored in Longmont.
All right, I don't see anybody else there, but I guess I would just say that, yeah, I was kind of being facetious in the beginning, but I just wish that we could figure out a way to all be more positive, because I don't know what it is, but I'm talking to family, friends, staff. I mean, I feel it in council. I don't know what it is, whether it's the economy turning, or maybe it's so good that we just have, you know, we look for things to worry about, but maybe it's national politics. I don't know, but just people seem heavy lately, and it sucks. That's my comment. All right, Harold?
Want to update council tomorrow at 6:15. We have the meeting or the presentation with the Army Corps of Engineers. I think that's on your calendar. I just wanted to remind council on that. That is for the work that we're doing in terms of the Resilient St. Vrain project. No comments after that.
All right. Eugene?
No comments, Mayor.
All right, we're adjourned.